Alright guys, in this section we're going to look at solving quadratic equations, and we're going to be using the factoring method. Before we can use the factoring method, we need to make sure that the equation is equal to 0, which it is. We also want to make sure that the quadratic is in standard form, which it is. Notice how we have the x squared, the x, and then the constant. This is what we call standard form. Once we've got those two things taken care of, what we're going to do is factor the quadratic. So that's what I'm going to be looking for here, the factors of x squared plus 6x plus 5. So to get the x squared, we need to multiply an x with another x. X times x gives me the x squared. Now what I need are two numbers that I can multiply together to get 5, but these two numbers also have to add up to 6. So what I'm going to be using is 5 and 1. Notice that when I multiply 5 times 1, I get a 5, and when I add 5 plus 1, I get a 6. Therefore, my factors of x squared plus 6x plus 5 are x plus 5 and x plus 1. Now keep in mind this is still equal to 0. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of the factors. X plus 5 is one of the factors, so I'm going to set it equal to 0. I'm also going to take the other factor, x plus 1, and I'm also going to set it equal to 0. And at this point I've got two equations that I'll be solving for. So I'm going to solve this first one over here. I'm going to subtract 5. 0 minus 5 is a negative 5. Therefore, one of my solutions to this quadratic is negative 5. Then I'll go over to the other equation and solve it. I'm going to subtract 1. And 0 minus 1 is a negative 1. Therefore, my other solution to this quadratic is negative 1. Therefore, our two solutions to this quadratic are negative 5 and negative 1. Alright, let's take a look at another example. Next equation we have is x squared minus 9x plus 20 equals 0. Again, notice how the equation is equal to 0. Also notice that the quadratic is in standard form. So I'm going to be looking for the factors of x squared minus 9x plus 20. So first of all, the x squared, I need to multiply an x with another x to get x squared. Now what I'm looking for are factors of 20 that are also going to add up to a negative 9. So the two numbers, or the two factors I'll be using, are negative 4 and negative 5. Notice how negative 4 times negative 5 give me the 20, and negative 4 plus the negative 5 add up to the negative 9. Therefore, these are my two factors. Again, this is still equal to 0. Once I have my factors, I'm going to take those two factors. We're going to set those equal to 0. And now we're going to need to solve each one of these equations for the x. So over here I'm going to start by adding 4. And 0 plus 4 is 4. Therefore, one of my solutions is 4. Go over and solve the other equation by adding 5. And 0 plus 5 gives me a 5. Therefore, my other solution to this quadratic would be 5. Therefore, the two solutions are 4 and 5. Alright, example number 3, we have x squared minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. Once again, notice how the equation is equal to 0. Also notice that it's in standard form. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and start factoring this quadratic. Just as in the first two examples, to get the x squared, we need to multiply x with another x. Now I'm looking for factors of a negative 12 that are also going to add up to a negative 4. And those two factors are negative 6 and positive 2. Because negative 6 times 2 gives me a negative 12. And when I add a negative 6 and 2, I also get my negative 4. So these are the factors. Of course, they're still equal to 0. Now what I can do is take each one of those factors, set them equal to 0, and we're going to solve each of these equations. So I'll start with this one over here. We're going to add 6. 0 plus 6 is 6. There's one of my solutions. Then I'll come over to the other equation and solve it by subtracting 2. And 0 minus 2 is a negative 2. Therefore, my two solutions to this quadratic are 6 and negative 2. Alright, example number 4. We've got the quadratic 6x squared plus 13x plus 6 is equal to 0. Just as in the first 3 examples, we got the quadratic equal to 0, and it's also in standard form. However, this one's going to require a little more work, and that's because the leading coefficient, or the number in front of the x squared, is a 6. So the method that I'll be using to factor this quadratic is something called bottoms up. And bottoms up is going to require a few steps. The first step, which I'm calling step A, is to rewrite the quadratic as x squared plus 13x plus 36. And that's because 6 times 6 would give me a 36. So this now becomes x squared plus 13x plus 36. At this point, we've got the quadratic x squared plus 13x plus 36, and we're going to factor that just as we did the first 3 examples. Next thing I'm going to do is factor x squared plus 13x plus 36. So just as we did earlier, we know that x times x will give me the x squared. What I need are factors of 36 that are also going to add up to a 13. So I'll be using 9 and 4. 9 times 4 gives me the 36, and 9 plus 4 will give me the 13. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 9 and 4, and I'm going to divide it by the leading coefficient, or our 6 there. Now notice how that fraction can be reduced. 9 over 6 can be reduced to 3 over 2. Same thing with 4 over 6. 4 over 6 can also be reduced to 2/3. Now, rather than leaving it like this with fractions, what we're going to do is, which is why we call this the bottoms up method, is we're going to bring the bottom number up in front of the variable. In other words, x plus 3 over 2 is now going to become 2x plus 3. So all I did was bring this 2 up in front of the x. I'm going to do the same thing with the other factor. I'm going to bring that 3 up in front of the x, making it a 3x plus 2. So these are my factors of 6x squared plus 13x plus 6. Now keep in mind this is still equal to 0. Now I'm not done yet because I still got to take these 2 factors and I've got to set each one of those equal to 0. And then we'll solve for x. So on the first one we're going to start by subtracting 3. 0 minus 3 is a negative 3. Finish it up by dividing by 2. Therefore x is equal to a negative 3/2, negative 3 over 2. So there's one of my solutions. I'll do the same thing on this other one here. I'm going to subtract 2. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. Divide by 3. And we end up with a negative 2/3. There's my other solution. So the 2 solutions are negative 3/2 and negative 2/3. Alright, last example we're going to look at is 2x squared plus 9x is equal to negative 9. First of all, notice how the equation is not equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is move the negative 9 to the other side. So this is now going to become 2x squared plus 9x plus 9. So all I did was move the 9 over to the other side. Now I can go ahead and start factoring the quadratic. Now this is just like number 4. The method we're going to be using is the bottoms up method. So I'm going to start by rewriting the quadratic as x squared plus 9x plus 18. 18 came from multiplying 2 times 9. 2 times 9 is 18. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor this quadratic. X times x is going to give me the x squared. What I need are factors of 18 that are also going to add up to a 9. In that case, that's going to be a 6 and a 3. 6 times 3 is 18. 6 plus 3 is 9. Next thing I'm going to do is take this 6 and 3 and divide it by the leading coefficient. And that leading coefficient is a 2. So you'll notice that 6 divided by 2. 6 divided by 2 now becomes a 3. Now if I try and divide 3 by 2, it's going to end up being a decimal. or a fraction. So what I'm going to do instead is bring this 2 up in front of the x, making this a 2x plus 3. Again, this is why we call it the bottoms up method. We're bringing the bottom number up in front of the variable. Still equal to 0. Now I'm not done yet. I still got to take my two factors, which are the x plus 3, set it equal to 0. I've also got to take my 2x plus 3, set it equal to 0, and solve for the x. So this first one here, we're going to subtract 3, and 0 minus 3 is a negative 3. So one of my solutions is negative 3. Go over and solve for the other x. Start by subtracting 3. 0 minus 3 is a negative 3. Divide by 2. And we end up with a negative 3/2. So the two solutions are negative 3 and negative 3/2.